Well, so far, Joe Biden's campaign promise to cancel student debt has remained just that, a campaign promise. But according to Forbes, the Department of Education signaled movement on the issue by hiring the founder and director of the Project on Predatory Student Lending, Toby Merrill. More notably, Merrill helped draft a key legal analysis arguing that the president has authority to cancel student loan debt through executive action.
So will Merrill's appointment prompt a harder push to cancel student loan debt? Co-founder of Aspiration and progressive entrepreneur Joe Sanberg joins us to discuss. Joe, what was your reaction to this?
Well, it's encouraging, but I think that to really see it across the finish line, we need to educate people about what's actually at stake here. When we talk about canceling the more than $1.8 trillion of student debt, we're not talking about something that just goes magically into outer space with Jeff Bezos. We're talking about the question of $1.8 trillion, instead of going back to the federal government in debt repayment, instead being spent on homes that are built by home builders who employ hundreds of thousands of people, being spent on travel at airlines and car rental places that employ lots of people, being spent on going out to dinner at restaurants that employ lots of people, being spent on clothing that make clothes in the United States, that sell those clothes in the United States, employing a lot of people. So I think that we need to take this out of the abstract. The question at hand is, do we want this $1.8 trillion that's currently on the shoulders of over 40 million people to be repaid to the federal government, or to be spent in our economy in a way that creates jobs and a powerful multiplier effect?
So it's now been more than a year, actually, since borrowers have had to make a payment on their federal student loans, but that break is set to end, as many people probably know, in September. You responded to that news, Joe, saying, quote, instead of kicking the can down the road with another extension, POTUS can cancel student debt today and free 44 million Americans from this financial nightmare. The executive action argument is a really interesting one. It's one that we've heard people like Bernie Sanders make before. Joe, can you explain to us what that argument is for why the president actually has the legal authority, per this argument, to cancel student loan debt via executive action?
Well, it's not an argument; it's a fact. So I can.
Right. So what's the mechanism? Yeah.
Right.
What's the mechanism? How does he go about doing that?
Yeah.
Because it's interesting, because the people have been saying this for a long time, that this is a fact. And Biden had promised it during the campaign that he would do it. But then as president, he said, well, I'm going to have somebody study it, which was itself curious, because you're like, wait a minute. So when you promised doing it in the campaign, you did it without knowing whether or not you could actually do it. Of course, that's not the case. He knew it was possible. Studying it is a way to kind of answer your critics, but also buy some time. But yeah, Joe. So Joe, what is the mechanism by which the administration simply cancels it?
Yeah. Well, let me put it into common parlance. Imagine if you owned a bank, and you decided, as the owner of the bank, you wanted to cancel debt owed to you by a particular borrower. You could do that as the owner of the bank. Well, student debt is money owed to the federal government, and Joe Biden is the chief executive of the federal government. So he has the power with his signature to decide that the federal government will waive its right to collect that debt.
Right, and it's interesting that there was even some question around this at a time when we're in a moratorium. Why would it be okay to have a moratorium, but not okay to just extend that moratorium? Just go and delete the end date for that moratorium, and you've solved the problem. Now, Joe, what's interesting about this debate is it falls down along some class lines, or it pretends to fall down along some class lines as well. All of your work has really been focused on working class and poor people. You have people on the Democratic establishment and on the right saying that canceling student debt is just a giveaway to elites, to privileged kids who were able to get these nice educations and now don't have to pay for them, and it's going to produce resentment. As somebody whose work is with the work, like I said, the working class and the poor, why do you think that argument's wrong?
It's nonsensical. Rich, privileged kids don't take on debt to go to college. I had to take on over $50,000 of debt to go to college, and I went to college with a lot of kids from really wealthy families, and they didn't have debt. And there was a really clear divide when I was in college between the kids who had debt because their families were working class and the rich kids who didn't have debt.
Although there is a
This
distinction.
idea that rich kids have debt, it doesn't even make any sense.
Well, they don't necessarily have
Then they're not that rich, right?
Public debt. And there's also the argument that people who borrow a lot of money to go to college are doing so with the
this only
expectation.
cancels the public debt.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I mean. And but then the counter argument to that, or the extension of the argument to that, would be people who borrow really heavily for school are borrowing really heavily to make a lot of money down the line. And I think there's, I imagine your research, Joe, on that is the people who do currently have debt are still disproportionately not able to pay it off because they're not, disproportionately lawyers and doctors, et cetera.
That's right. And it goes farther than that. It goes to the breakdown of a social contract and, frankly, the exposure of a lie. In business, there's this notion that you can't falsely induce someone to do something. So if I get you to buy something based on lying to you about what that thing is, you can force me to take that thing back. It's not allowable in our system of laws that you can get people to do things in the private sector by lying to them. Well, we've lied to an entire generation of Americans by telling them that if they took out tens of thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of student debt, that awaiting them would be good paying jobs that would allow them to afford life's basic needs and live the American dream. And so I think that, at least on a moral basis, we induced 44 million people into $1.8 trillion of debt based on a lie. And the least we can do is cancel that debt.
Right. Even though education costs have increased, wages have remained pretty stagnant. You cite that lobbyists bribe politicians to vote against a high minimum wage, and that if wages increased to match productivity, minimum wage would be $23 right now. And I think that goes directly to the point that you were just making. At the same time, I wonder if Biden actually goes forward with doing this, I wonder if you're going to have a lot of people who thought that they were going to get debt cancellation, but it turns out because they had private loans, they're not going to. While at the same time, those people with the private loans are distorting the conversation, because you're saying, well, what about these people that took out a couple $100,000, to go to this lavish
to law school to get their
like,
master's degree in feminist literature,
right? Which wouldn't be covered by the Biden administration.
Well, it's just a red herring. I mean, the portion of people who've taken on a ton of student debt that did so for these esoteric graduate degrees is such a small amount of the whole. It's like the red herring that conservatives use when they're trying to argue against the higher minimum wage. And they say, well, higher minimum wage is going to go to 16-year-olds who are just trying to save up to buy a new iPhone. But their arguments fall flat in the face of these things called facts. The fact is, a supermajority of the debt that's on the shoulders of 44 million Americans, the student debt, is on the shoulders of people who've gone to trade schools and to public colleges in the hope of trying to improve their outcomes in life. And they were lied to about the wages that would await. And we owe them to make right to that lie that induced them into taking on all this debt.
So, Joe, your counterpoint, or your argument about the counterpoints on the right, I think gets to a much larger structural point, which is, and especially which applies on student debt as well as it applies to the minimum wage, in that it's not necessarily just teenagers who are relying on minimum wage jobs. The way our economy is structured right now is you actually have a lot of people that are trying to earn a living and provide for their families on minimum wage jobs. In the same way that we have an economy that's not structured to make all of these college degrees worth it, in a sense that you can actually achieve the American dream just by taking out those Pell Grants and getting your education. And isn't that really, at the end of the day, the broader problem is that our economy isn't organized to accommodate what people were promised and what things used to look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, our economy is deeply corrupt. We get political outcomes that are bought by people who have the most amount of money. And even worse, we tell kids, and I'm sure the three of us were all told this when we were kids, that if you work hard and play by the rules, you can live the American dream. Yet when we look all around the economy, we see examples where really those who are succeeding are those who cheat most successfully for a long enough amount of time to gain the most amount of power and money. So when finally the government comes around with consequences for their cheating, the consequences are so much less than the money that they've accumulated. I mean, let's be honest. We have a cheating economy. Our economy rewards those who cheat the smartest, not those who work the hardest and have the best ideas. And if we don't get at that root corruption and rejigger the economy so it actually rewards those who work hard and play by the rules, we'll never be able to save our democracy. The problems we have with our democracy are so intrinsically linked to the culture that we've engendered that rewards cheating instead of hard work.
Which also, by the way, dulls people's incentives to do the innovation and hard work that is needed to lift.
All you got to do is cheat. Right. Yeah, Joe, it's well said. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll have more Rising for you right after this.